Hello, everyone. Today I would like to discuss this week's readings that talks about the racial minorities and the gender minorities across the US in the early 20th century. And this week's reading covers a variety of minority groups about gender and race across the US map. The commonality among these readings is that the Caucasian were either victims or winners in the cases, uh, while the people of color were always considered criminals, degenerates, and did not deserve to enjoy the same rights as the white people. Initially, the Nyan and the birth articles they illustrate how Asian immigrants were described as irregular beings in California. Shan Shah introduced Hin- Hindu homosexual men who were targeted by the police and charged by vagrancy law just because of their ethnicity. As the author make example of homosexual behavior between two white males that considered moral and regular in the US society, but the same sexual relationship between men of color and white men were not considered as the same as the white to white men's. The vagrancy law restricted the Asian minorities' rights and attempted to ignore the Caucasians' quote unquote degenerate behaviors. A similar example is also reflected in Peggy Pascoe's article, which talks about miscegenation law in Oregon society. Even if a marriage between an indigenous woman and a white man was lasted for decades, and both had contributed their to their family equally and proved by their neighbors and family members. The, this indigenous widow, whose name is Ophelia, could only finally receive partial property from this family and reluctantly rendered her husband's estate to her husband's brother, who did not actually deserve this estate. This case was only due to the racial identity, and Ophelia's American Indian identity made her lose ownership of her husband's heritage. In Carino's case, as historians state, it was interesting that Carino's secret sex became a positive story reported by local newspapers. And it was only because that Carino attempted to present her as a white person first and later an American Indian identity. Her queer relationship with her girlfriend was praised in the local community, which Carino worked so hard to change their lives due to her gender and racial identity. As local residents argued in Edmore's article, people people praised Carino because she, originally as a quote unquote barbarian Indian woman, desired to work as a normal white person and lived in the society. So they praised Carino's life, this case, and they support it as a positive event. And the Leo Frank's case in Georgia was an interesting article involving many factors such as anti-Semitism, nationalism, working class movement, and exceptionalism. This case covered a white girl, a working class African American, and a rich Jew. As the article mentioned, this case was about the popular will of the majority. The fact it might not fit people's willingness, which Leo Frank was innocent. Instead, the majority would like to make Frank as a criminal who raped a young white girl, even if there were not any sufficient pieces of evidence to prove Frank's crime. The case also showcased a question that the lynching of Leo Frank was either due to people's willingness or the government's tolerance to the majority's minds. I personally think that people's conceptions were always cultivated and supported, shaped by the politicians, the government, the state. So the white working class believed that the Jews were stealing their money and raping their children. Finally, let's move let us move back to California again in Loomis. The Chinese immigrants in Loomis communities. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 only permitted the Chinese men to enter into the US, and their wives had to remain in China. The Chinese immigrant workers in the US were similar with other people who desired female accompanists. However, they were not always considered as citizens and of the United States and allowed to having marriage with the white females. So even though they made the same contribution to the state's development, moreover, their interactions with white women were not allowed in certain states, counties, and towns, and always considered as harassment to the white people. The white patriarchal society attempted to prohibit the Chinese immigrants to contact with white women, and even sometimes these women were voluntary. These Chinese immigrants were either reported by the white communities to the court or arrested in the jails. Overall, in the early 20th century US society, alien males were seen as evil beasts who should not enjoy the same rights as Caucasians community. To the indigenous community who were the real local residents on this land, the mainstream conceptions evaluated them as uncivilized people. It also reflects on the Quirino's case. In these readings, the young white girls and boys were always victims, threatened by these immoral and uncivilized minorities. The state and the courts could neglect the same degenerate behaviors made by the white people, but condemn the racial minorities. That's my presentation. Thank you so much.